Wimbledon is one of the most prestigious tournaments in the world of sports, and while it's usually a competition between the strongest in the game, sometimes the underdogs come out on top. These players defy expectations and perform when the audience least expects them to, resulting in major upsets. In today's video, we're talking about it, so stay tuned as we take a look at some of the most unlikely Wimbledon winners in history. First up, Bob Falkenberg in 1948 at number 9. Bob Falkenberg is a tennis Hall of Famer turned entrepreneur. Falkenberg is known as somewhat of a one-hit wonder in the world of tennis with his unpredictable men's singles win at the 1948 Wimbledon. This was the only time the player was able to make it through the quarterfinals of the tournament. Not just that, but his Wimbledon victory was also the only time he ever got past the semifinals of a Grand Slam event. After Falkenberg reached the finals, he had to face John Bromwich, the 1946 Australian Open champion and the number 2 seed at Wimbledon that year. However, despite all offs, Falkenberg was able to score all 3 match points, won 4 straight games, and beat Bromwich. After this phenomenal win, the fans expected the champion to keep the winning streak going, but he could never really top his own self. The player eventually passed up a $100,000 a year professional tennis contract to start his own American fast food business in Brazil. And well, let's just say that he has no regrets. Moving on, Arthur Ashe in 1975 at number 8. Arthur Ashe started playing tennis when he was just 6 years old, but somewhere along the line, he started losing his grip, so it was a surprise when he made it to the 1975 Wimbledon final, and it's safe to say that no one was expecting him to beat Jimmy Connors 6-1, 6-1, 5-7, and 6-4 in the finals. This was Ashe's first ever Wimbledon final as the number 6 seed at the age of 41. When he beat Connors for the championship, the top-seeded player had not lost a single set on his way to the finals. So it came off as a shock when Ashe was the player who was finally able to beat him. Even Connors' powerful ground strokes were no match for Ashe's sharp strategy that resulted in one of the most memorable Wimbledon finals of all time. Let's talk about Andre Agassi in 1992 at number 7. Now, we know what you're thinking. Isn't Andre Agassi an 8-time Grand Slam winner? But back in 1992, he was still just starting out, and no one believed that he could actually make it, especially with his number 14 ranking at the time. In the previous 2 Wimbledon, Agassi had lost in the first round and then in the quarterfinals. His performance had been mediocre at best, and from what the fans knew, grass was his worst surface. He was seeded 12th at the 1992 Wimbledon and never played any warm-up events on grass courts where he was known not to perform well. So it came as a surprise when he was able to make it through the quarterfinals against star player Boris Becker. He then knocked off John McEnroe and Goran Ivanovic in the semifinals and the final, taking the title at the age of just 22. It's safe to say that he left everyone shocked with this performance, setting himself up for a much more successful career ahead. Now for Sidney Wood in 1931 at number 6. Sidney Wood is actually the only player in Wimbledon history to win a championship without even having to show up for the final match. So let's just say that it was pure luck that won Sidney his first and only Grand Slam title. In any of his previous tournaments, Wood had never gone past the 3rd round, and since he was just 19 back in 1931, the odds were stacked against him that year too. So while he was seated at number 7, Jean Barotra and Henry Cachet were the top 2 seeds, which meant that Wood stood no chance. But when Cachet faced a major upset in the first round and Wood managed to win the semifinals, he was then ready to go up against Frank Shields. However, because of his knee injury, Shields couldn't play the match and Wood won by a fortunate walkover. Coming up, Marion Bartoli in 2013 at number 5. Marion Bartoli had proven herself to be a player with tons of potential when she made it to the Wimbledon final in 2007, but the fans thought that her winning streak had come to a halt after that. She managed to reach the final of a Grand Slam event 7 years later, and even then, the odds weren't really in her favor. Bartoli ended up losing in the first round of 4 out of her last 7 tournaments. Her ranking had slipped to 15th, and there was nothing that suggested that she was a strong contender. At the same time, Serena Williams had been the top player in 2013, and her record had been almost unbeatable. However, in a fortunate turn of events for Bartoli, Serena was taken out by Lisicki in an unexpected upset, and then Bartoli went on to beat Lisicki, taking the title home. Then we have Jean Codes in 1973 at number 4. There's no denying that Jean Codes held the reputation of being a pretty great tennis player, but the catch was that he was a clay court specialist who somehow always seemed to lose in the first 2 rounds in 12 of the 15 Wimbledon tournaments he had played. So when he was seeded 15th in the 1973 Wimbledon, the fans weren't really expecting much from him. Codes is known to have won the weirdest Wimbledon ever because back in 1973, the Association of Tennis Professionals. As a result, 82 pros withdrew from the tournament, and so 11 of the top 12 seeds were out of the game in an instant. This helped Codes move all the way up to number 2. He reached the quarterfinals where he defeated Vijay Amritraj and then beat Roger Taylor in the semifinals. Then, with a win of straight sets over Alex Mitrovelli, Kotis earned his championship in the tournament of a lifetime. Next up, Goran Ivanisevic in 2001 and number 3. Throughout his Wimbledon career, Goran Ivanisevic was always known to miss the mark at the last minute. After reaching not just one, but 3 previous finals, he sadly lost against Agassi in 1992 and then against Sampras in both 1994 and 1998. So when it was time for the 2001 Wimbledon, no one really had their eyes on him, not to mention the fact that he was also unseeded. The athlete realistically had no chance of even making it past the first few games. In fact, the athlete had to get a wildcard entry just to play in the Wimbledon. But in a fortunate stroke of luck, he was able to play a brilliant game and reach the final where he defeated Patrick Rafter to win the trophy that he had been after for a long time. A true underdog win, followed by Venus Williams in 2007 at number 2. Venus Williams is one of the undisputed champions of tennis. Sure, she's won 5 titles at Wimbledon, but 2007 was a different ballgame for the athlete, whose career was in a rapid decline. Owing to her multiple injuries, Venus had lost the 3rd round at Wimbledon 2006. She hadn't beaten a single top 12 player when the 2007 tournament began, so the odds were automatically stacked against her. She was ranked 31st and seeded at number 23, but she used this as her motivation to put her best foot forward. After losing in the 1st and 3rd rounds, she ended up beating the number 3 seeded Maria Sharapova, number 5 seeded Svetlana Kuznetsova, and number 6 seeded Anna Ivanovic, earning herself a spot in the final. Then Williams beat Marion Bartoli and became the lowest seeded player to ever win a Wimbledon title. She truly is the queen of the game. Not to mention Richard Krajicek in 1996 and number 1. Richard Krajicek wasn't even on anyone's radar at the 1996 Wimbledon, especially after he had lost in the first round of the tournament the previous 2 years. In fact, the player had even lost to athletes ranking outside the top 80, which really showed that his game wasn't up to the mark. The only reason why he was seeded for the 1996 Wimbledon was that Thomas Muster had to drop out with an injury, and after he pulled out, Krajicek was able to get in as the number 17 seed. Even then, the critics and fans alike treated him as an unseeded, irrelevant player, but that was until he managed to pull off one of the biggest upsets in the history of the tournament. Pete Sampras was in the running for the title as the number 1 seed, so it came as a shock when Krajicek managed to defeat him in the quarterfinals. This was Sampras' first loss at the tournament, but the champion accepted defeat and claimed that his opponent had played better than him. After that, it seemed like luck was on Krajicek's side because number 2 seeded Boris Becker had to drop out because of an injury, leaving Krajicek to only beat Jason Stoltenberg and Malavia Washington in the semifinals and in the final to earn his title. Talk about a win that no one saw coming. Unfortunately, Krajicek never reached the final of a Grand Slam event ever again in his career. Well, that's a wrap. Who is your favorite player from this list? Let us know in the comments down below. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next video. Bye!